Something happened in this hearing that almost nobody caught in real time. But once you hear it, you'll understand why Senator Chris Van Hollen's single question shook the entire room. Because when the nation's top law enforcement official can't give a straight answer about whether she'll follow the budget authorization law, that's not just a policy disagreement. That's a spotlight on a much deeper problem, one that touches accountability, frozen funding, hate crime protections, and the quiet power shifts happening inside the Department of Justice. And the tension didn't build slowly. It hit immediately. Van Hollen asked a question so simple it should have taken 5 seconds to answer. Will you comply with the budget authorization law?
ATF will keep its brand. DEA will keep its brand. But what they're doing, they're going under one umbrella, doing away with the bureaucracy at the top. These agents are going, they want to be out hunting down criminals. That's what they want to do. They work, so much of this work is the same work, going back and forth. And now they will be working collaboratively together to keep America safe. And we're going to put hundreds of agents back, thousands, back on the streets, and that's where they want to be. And I would have had the initial concerns that you have about that. But give us a chance, let it work, let the DEA and ATF work together, get those agents out there, do away with the bureaucracy, and hopefully we will make America safer as a result of it.
Well, I will say that wasn't just my reaction to the proposal. I was actually hearing from ATF agents as well. So again, we will obviously review that question in a bipartisan way on the committee, but I just wanted your assurance, and I appreciate it, that you'll comply with the appropriations law, which would require congressional action in order to go forward with that.
We don't need congressional action for this move, however.
Well, I thought I just got clarification. Well, it's going to be important to both the chairman and myself to understand your position as Attorney General on whether or not you can proceed with this merger without congressional action.
We are keeping ATF, we are keeping DEA. We are putting them under the same umbrella within the Department of Justice.
So I'm not arguing with you here. I want to understand your position. I think it will be important to members on both sides of the committee. The appropriations law currently would require that Congress approve of this merger. And so my question to you as Attorney General is, do you agree with that or disagree with that?
We will complete this reorganization, and I'm committed. I will look at that under the law. We will not violate the law, Senator, and we will work with Congress regarding that.
No, I appreciate that. So the second point I wanted to raise had to do with the prosecution of hate crimes, and I share your vigor in wanting to go after and prosecute hate crimes. I would just point out that the budget that you submitted zeroes out funding for 3 of the DOJ hate crimes programs, the hate crimes training program, Shepard Bird hate crimes, the Javara Hire No Hate Act, and the community approaches to advancing justice. So I hope you'll work with the committee if we seek to restore funding for those programs.
Yes, Senator, I just pulled up the details of those 3. Let me see. I'd be happy to discuss those with you further.
Good. And finally, I want to go back.
All 3 of those.
Thank you. I want to go back to the issues of grant determinations, because I think there continues to be some confusion between grants that had already been obligated that were withheld. And to my knowledge, there are about 400 of those still pending. It'd be helpful to get from your team if you have a different number. And then there's what we call notices for information, which relates to notices for future grant awards in this current fiscal year.
Yes, there is a difference.
And so I understood your earlier testimony to say, with respect to the notices, the department plan to issue those very shortly. Is that right?
Yeah, and Senator, yes, you are correct on that. We notified the affected grantees and members of Congress regarding the terminations and how to appeal. That was the $811 million of grants that were initially terminated in 2025. We're also talking about upcoming ones as well.
Right. So I want to leave this hearing with some clarity on this issue. So when it comes to the notices of funding opportunities, because the clock is ticking on this fiscal year, do you and the Department of Justice intend to quickly notify people of those opportunities going forward?
Yes, Senator Van Hollen, as I said earlier, and it will be done on a rolling basis, but yes, within the coming weeks, we are absolutely doing that, yes.
And so finally, on
a rolling basis.
On the other category, which are the grants that had been previously obligated, I do have concerns, Madam Attorney General, with the idea that the way we're going to get them to stop being withheld is members of Congress calling. I appreciate the invitation, and I will look to see if we've been hearing from people. But this category of grants relates to people who already went through the process and already had those grants obligated, and they're currently being held. Mm-hmm. So my question to you is, can you tell us how many are still being held today? And I don't like the idea that in order for somebody to get their withheld grant, unheld, that they have to call a member of Congress. That should be, so how many are left? Do you know? How many of these grants are?
I don't know exactly, Senator, but I know many of them are the subject of ongoing litigation, so I wouldn't be able to speak of that in detail in this forum anyway.
Well, maybe just a follow-up, because it would be helpful to try to narrow the scope of this. Again, my understanding, and this was the subject of the letter I referenced earlier from a number of senators.
And I have not read that letter, but I will be happy to read that letter.
Yeah, if you and your team could get back to us right away on that, because these are grants that, as the chairman knows, have been previously obligated, some many years ago, but frozen. And so the question is, how can we get them unfrozen? And members of Congress will call, but not everybody, can just call up their member of Congress or thinks of calling their member of Congress. We need a process that's fair to everybody. I hope you'd agree.
And actually, citizens have called as well.
Well, exactly. And so, exactly. So, but again, this is an ongoing issue. And I know colleagues on both sides of the aisle are hearing from folks. So, Mr. Chairman, unless something else comes up, that's it. And look forward to continuing the conversation.
It's not my intention to ask any topics or questions that cause you to come back again, but if I do...
Thank you, Senator Moran.
You're welcome, General.
And instead of a clear, confident yes, what we got was a loop of shifting explanations, partial commitments, and carefully phrased dodges. You could almost feel the committee lean in, waiting for clarity that never fully landed. But that moment wasn't isolated. It was the doorway into a much bigger story, one that shows how money, authority, and public trust intersect behind the scenes. The moment Bondi started explaining the ATF, DEA restructuring, everything got even more complicated. On paper, the DOJ says it's streamlining operations by placing both agencies under one umbrella. Bondi described it as removing bureaucracy, getting agents out of offices and back into the field, and putting more boots on the ground to stop violent offenders. It sounded clean, even efficient. But this is where the tension took a turn, because ATF agents themselves reportedly raised concerns about what this merger actually means. Some, according to internal buzz and commentary floating around legislative circles, are worried about losing independence, shifting priorities, and the possibility of having their missions reshaped by a department-wide reorganization they didn't sign off on. These aren't confirmed reports, but the concerns have been circulating for months. And that's exactly why Van Hollen pressed on the legal issue. The law seems to require congressional approval for major agency reorganizations. This isn't a small technicality. This is Congress guarding one of its most fundamental powers, oversight of federal bodies. So when Bondi claimed they didn't need congressional action, alarms started going off. Then, moments later, she changed the framing. The department would look at it under the law, they would not violate the law, and they'd work with Congress. That subtle shift spoke volumes. It went from certainty to possibility to reassurances that didn't settle anything. And that's why this moment matters. Because if even the Attorney General can't give a definitive position about whether a merger needs congressional approval, then the entire reorganization becomes a moving target. And anytime the rules themselves appear fluid, confidence in the system starts to slip. But the merger was only the first layer of the problem. What came next peeled it open even further. Van Hollen shifted the conversation to hate crime programs, specifically 3 DOJ initiatives that the proposed budget zeroed out entirely. These are programs designed to train local law enforcement, improve reporting, support prevention, and provide communities with tools to address violent bias incidents. Cutting them doesn't just remove funding. It removes infrastructure. It removes support systems. It sends a message, whether intended or not, about where the DOJ is placing its priorities. Bondi responded by saying she'd pulled up the details and was willing to talk about them. But she didn't push back against the fact that they were zeroed out. She didn't explain why. She didn't justify the change. She didn't give a single reason these programs suddenly vanished from the budget. And that silence spoke louder than any explanation she could have offered. Because when hate crime rates are rising in cities across the country, the disappearance of funding for these programs raises questions nobody wants brushed aside. But the real turning point came when the conversation shifted to frozen grants. Not proposed future grants. Not hypothetical opportunities. Not pending evaluations. These were grants already approved, already obligated, sometimes for years. And communities, police departments, nonprofits, and local organizations are still waiting to receive money they were promised. That alone is a red flag. Money that's already been awarded should not be stuck in bureaucratic limbo. Van Hollen asked the obvious question: how many grants are still being withheld? Bondi couldn't give a number. She pointed to ongoing litigation, to internal processes, to general explanations that didn't answer the actual question. And that's when the hearing hit its most revealing moment. Because Van Hollen expressed something that millions of Americans have quietly felt about government processes for years. It shouldn't take a call to a senator to unfreeze money that's already been earned. When Bondi responded that citizens have called as well, it didn't address the root issue. It only made it clearer that the system currently operates in a way that's reactive instead of structured, inconsistent instead of transparent. And when the distribution of federal grants becomes unpredictable, uneven, or influenced by who calls whom, trust collapses. People stop believing in the fairness of the process. They start believing the only people who get help are the ones with access. And here's the quiet part that's even more unsettling. If grants that have already been approved can sit frozen indefinitely, what else can be delayed the same way? What programs? What protections? What commitments previously made by the federal government? When the Justice Department can't clearly explain why money is withheld or when it will be released, that's not just inefficient. That's destabilizing. But the conversation didn't end with money or mergers or hate crime programs. It ended with something bigger. A question about trust. A question about whether the Justice Department, the institution responsible for fairness, for transparency, for the rule of law, is operating with clear rules or shifting ones. Because Bondi's answers, taken together, painted a picture of an agency that is reorganizing itself while simultaneously reducing certain protections, delaying funding, and relying on discretionary processes instead of consistent systems. And you could see the pattern take shape. A merger without a clear legal explanation. Hate crime programs cut without public justification. Grants frozen without a timeline. And answers that moved just enough to avoid landing anywhere definite. When you add all of those together, the hearing becomes something far bigger than a budget conversation. It becomes a test of government accountability. It becomes a reminder that transparency is not a default. It's something lawmakers must demand, insist on, and reinforce again and again. Because every time a federal agency avoids clarity, power shifts. And every time oversight becomes optional, the public loses something. And that's the real reason this hearing matters. Not because of the heated exchanges or the awkward evasions, but because it exposes how fragile public trust can be when transparency erodes, when commitments disappear quietly from budgets, when money gets stuck in unexplainable delays, when reorganizations happen behind layers of shifting language. Van Hollen wasn't just asking about a merger. He wasn't just asking about grants. He wasn't just asking about hate crime funding. He was asking whether the Department of Justice will follow the rules that every other agency has to follow, whether the power of the purse still belongs to Congress, whether the law still sets the boundaries. Because if executive agencies start interpreting those boundaries loosely, the balance of power in government begins to tilt. And that's why hearings like this aren't just procedural. They're essential. They are one of the few places where public officials have to answer questions with the cameras rolling and the nation watching. Because without these hearings, decisions happen quietly, budgets shift silently, and reorganizations take shape without public understanding. If you watched this exchange and felt like there was more going on beneath the surface, you're right. This wasn't about paperwork or funding lines. It was about whether the public can trust the system to operate fairly, whether grants will reach the communities that already earned them, whether hate crime protections will remain strong in a moment when the nation desperately needs them, whether the DOJ will respect congressional authority and legal limits as it reshapes itself internally. And that's why it's important to stay informed, to stay engaged, and to understand what's really at stake when these hearings unfold. Because the consequences aren't abstract. They affect real programs, real communities, real protections, and real people waiting for resources they were promised years ago. And as this hearing showed, those promises are only as strong as the mechanisms designed to uphold them. If you want more breakdowns like this, where we cut through the surface noise and unpack what's actually happening behind the political theater, make sure you subscribe, drop a like, and turn on notifications. This channel is here to make sure you never miss the moments that reveal how power really works. And trust me, the next hearing is already lining up questions just as explosive as this one. Stay tuned.